Welcome, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here today, everybody. All right, we have folks that are jumping on in the call. All right, we have a very exciting day planned, and we have a lot of information to share. So we are going to go ahead and get started. Again, welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. My name is Jennifer Barron-Prahl, and I am privileged to welcome you to today's event on person-centered recovery planning. We have three amazing speakers, Dr. Janice Tondora, Amanda Bowman, and Amy Pierce, who are all wonderful people. You'll be excited then to hear them today. This is actually our first webinar of a series of 6 sessions. This project is jointly hosted by 2 mental health technology transfer centers, Region 1, New England MHTTC, and Region 6, the South-Southwest MHTTC. I want to recognize and thank Dr. Janice Tondora and Dr. Stacy Manser for their vision for this training and for leading a team to make it come to life. Thank you, Janice and Stacy, for the care, compassion, and excellence that you put into all the work that you do for the MHTTC. All right, so everyone, we're so happy that you could join us. Let's go ahead and get started with some introductory information. All right, here's a brief acknowledgement for today's session. This presentation was prepared for the MHTTC network under a cooperative agreement from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, also known as SAMHSA. The opinions expressed in the presentation are the views of our speakers and do not reflect the official position of the Department of Health and Human Services, or SAMHSA. Our MHTTC network uses affirming, respectful, recovery-oriented language in all of our activities. This is particularly important to the work that we do with person-centered recovery planning. So we invite you all to join us in reflecting on what language is most strengths-based and recovery-oriented as we exchange thoughts and ideas in this series, so that we can all grow in our ability to affirm and support others through our use of language. Here are a few housekeeping items for today. You'll see that we're currently in a Zoom meeting platform, so you are able to unmute and share, and I'm very excited actually to see that folks are using the chat box now. If you have a question or a comment, please use that chat box. We have a wonderful team supporting today's events. Christine and Lee will be keeping an eye out for questions and responding, and our presenters will also be on the lookout for questions. So we really do encourage you to interact and share your thoughts and ideas. Know that CEUs are available for this event, and certificates for 1.5 CEUs will be emailed to you within 2 days then of today's session. Know that this session is being recorded, and both the recording and then the presentation deck will be made available to participants. As I had mentioned earlier, this presentation is being hosted in a collaborative effort by 2 mental health technology transfer centers. So Region 1, New England MHTTC, and Region 6, the South-Southwest MHTTC. You can see us here. There's Region 1 up here, and then Region 6 in the purple down there. The MHTTC is an initiative that's funded by SAMHSA to provide free training and technical assistance events, resources, and products to support and strengthen our mental health workforce. This map that you're seeing depicts all of the regions within the US and then each of the MHTTCs that support each area. We have a wide range of folks then that are attending today. So I encourage you to look up your MHTTC and check out the great trainings and products and resources available to you. Okay, now we are ready to get started. It is my honor to open the floor to our esteemed presenters today, Dr. Janice Tondora, Amanda Bowman, and Amy Pierce. It's my pleasure. All right, passing it on to you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, for the intro. I'm going to get us started here. So I'm Janice Tondora. I use she, her, hers pronouns. Thank you again for being here. You can read a little bit more about my professional background here on the screen, but in brief, I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm an associate professor at a place called the Yale Program for Recovery and Community Health, where I've been for over 20 years. I'm very passionate about the translation of recovery-oriented principles into recovery-oriented practices, especially as it relates to collaborative recovery planning. So I've supported person-centered recovery planning by, conducting research, developing educational curricula and tools, and doing training and consultation at the practice and systems levels with a bunch of states around the country. But I'm also passionate about this topic, really from a personal perspective. I'm a loving mom of an autistic young adult who has struggled mightily with the mental health consequences of being neurodivergent in a very neurotypical world. And I've also personally myself struggled with very serious medical issues that I'm still navigating to this day. So I've spent a lot of time with doctors over the last decade. So I've seen the healing power of person-centered care in action, but I also have really known that kind of raw vulnerability and upset when I feel like I've had my voice and choice be trumped by the opinions of well-intended others. So this is a topic that resonates very powerful with me on a number of levels. So thanks again for joining us. We're so thrilled we have a big turnout, and I'm going to pitch it over to Amanda.
Thanks, Janice. Good afternoon. My name is Amanda Bowman, and professionally, I am a clinical social worker. I'm a certified peer specialist supervisor, wellness recovery action plan, WRAP facilitator. I'm also a person with lived experience who's had a life disruption due to a mental health challenge. I am not a peer specialist, though. I identify as a clinician using her lived experience to promote recovery-oriented change within our behavioral health system. I was in an executive leadership role at a mental health agency who was implementing person-centered recovery planning. And I really felt like that got me back in touch with why I chose social work as a professional career path to begin with. And then became really passionate about systems change work, and have been doing that for the past decade or so. Really passionate about peer practices and what that might look like both within and outside of clinical agencies, and also really passionate about staff wellness and taking care of the people working within our system. I'm really excited to be here today. Thank you for your time. I'm going to pass it over to Amy Pierce.
Thanks, Amanda. My name is Amy Pierce, and I use pronouns she, her, hers. I'm a mental health peer specialist, a peer specialist supervisor, an advanced level WRAP facilitator. I say all those things, but who I am is a person with lived experience who's really navigated the public and private systems of care, really looking for and seeking that place of wellness. And from that, I found this world of peer support, and I stumbled into it in the sense of really wanting to make a difference and some change at the state hospital that I was working at, where I had been hospitalized previously for almost a year. And through that, and through those experiences, I've really had the opportunity to work with organizations across Texas, across the nation, and internationally in recovery-oriented change work. One of the cool things for me is that I actually met Janice and Amanda at the same kind of time over 12 years ago when Texas did a pilot program on person-centered recovery planning. And it was the push for me that actually had me leave the work at the state hospital and go work in the community services. Because when I heard about it, I was like, it's this. This is what we need to be doing. And we need to be hearing people, listening, that voice and that choice. And I am so passionate about this work, and I just really appreciate having the opportunity to be here with you all today and, be a part of this conversation. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to move forward a little bit, because you've heard a little bit about us, right? But we really want to hear who is in this room, who's joining us today, who's part of this community in this moment. And we're going to launch a poll right now. Christine, if you don't mind launching that poll. And I do want to note where it says service recipient, person with lived experience, that's the language we're going to be using. I do want to acknowledge that there's many different ways in which that terminology shows up. You know, for many persons, it might be client, person in recovery, patient, person with a disability, psychiatric survivor, person with lived experience, person in distress, or consumer. But we want to make the note is like always honor that individual preferences, and when in doubt, just ask the person.
The M button on her thing is busted.
Yeah, we're going to leave that there while we're still getting persons to share who they are and what role they're stepping into. And then once we give people a little bit of time, we'll hit that end of the poll and then we'll publish it so you can see who all's in the room with each of you. Got about half the people who've put in into the poll so far. Got about a minute more. Just for time's sake, we're going to go ahead and close this poll. But please, if you didn't have an opportunity to put who you are, go ahead and please share that in the chat. I just want to acknowledge, I love how many different roles, how many different persons are in this space, the variety of persons who are interested in this conversation. That's incredible. So thank you all for being here. And I'm going to turn it over to Amanda now to continue our conversation.
All right, thank you, Amy. All right. So when we say person-centered recovery planning, or PCRP, I think it's really, really important to stop and make sure that we're very clear on what kind of planning we're referring to. I think that this is not always clear, and people are referring to different things when they're using person-centered planning or person-centered recovery planning. So let's take a minute and talk about what we're referring to. Specifically, there are two different types of planning that we have been promoting for many years throughout the system that are both really, really critical for people who are navigating behavioral health challenges to have access to. There is service planning. If you choose to be the recipient of professional services, whether those professional services includes medication or not, it might be counseling, it might be peer support, but any type of service that requires a professional service plan for reimbursement and billing. And then there's personal self-directed wellness planning. And this type of planning is 100% owned by the person. It does not have any requirements by the system for regulatory purposes, reimbursement, or billing. We feel very strongly that people need to have access to this self-directed wellness planning in addition to person-centered service planning as well, if you're choosing to get professional services. Many people may not be in contact with the formal system getting professional services, but if they are, we believe that it is their right to have person-centered service planning. And today we are talking about that type of planning being person-centered. So just to be clear, we are not talking about planning such as WRAP, Wellness Recovery Action Planning. I have my own WRAP. I'm a WRAP facilitator. Amy Pierce is an advanced level WRAP facilitator. She mentored me. I can't imagine being in recovery myself without having a WRAP. We have promoted WRAP within professional clinical service settings throughout the state of Texas for many years now. That does not take the place of having a person-centered service plan as well. In other words, we can't let clinical professional staff off the hook for being person-centered and recovery-oriented, as well as other services that people may go out and get on their own outside of the mental health or behavioral health system. So we just want to be really clear that today and in this program, should you choose to participate further after today, when we say PCRP, person-centered recovery planning, we are including the plan that you co-create with the person that includes professional services and the personal action steps that they would take. So we want to be really clear today that we are including service planning as well. Okay, so here's an official definition for you here. Person-centered recovery planning is a collaborative process between a person and their behavioral health care providers and natural supporters, if they choose for those supporters to be involved, that results in the development and implementation of an action plan to assist the person in achieving their unique goals along the journey of recovery. And I love this. I really want to emphasize these two words alongside one another, and that's the word need and the word want. We talk a lot about what individuals need before talking about what they want. And that really, really needs to change. So my little elevator definition of PCRP has always been, we can't know what a person needs before we understand what it is that they want. So understanding what a person wants has to come first, and then we also understand what it is that they need alongside that. So not just about the needs, but also about their vision of a life worth living and what they want. So we want to acknowledge there are many forces behind PCRP. So now that we've talked about what it is, we just want to acknowledge all of the different mandates and requirements. We see the phrase person-centered, family-centered, client-centered, patient-centered popping up, for many years in many different areas. Funders, accrediting bodies, and national best practice organizations. But most of all, it is being demanded for quite some time by service recipients, by people with lived experience saying, you keep talking about me getting in the driver's seat when half the time, I'm not even in the car. You're making decisions without me. I'm not in the room. you invite me in at the very end of the decision-making process rather than including me. It's not collaborative, right? So there are a lot of different citations here. We're going to make these slides available to you after. And so I'm not going to read through all of this, but certainly many of the agencies that you all are coming from have gone through the process of becoming CCBHCs. Being person-centered and family-centered, recovery-oriented is a big part of becoming the certified community behavioral health centers. STAMPS's guiding principles of recovery talk a lot about individuals defining their own life goals and designing their unique path toward those goals. CMS, of course, talks about person-centered planning as well. So if we know that PCRP is the right thing to do and that we're required to do it, why then have Janice and Amy and I had such long careers? Why are we not out of work? Why are we continuing to do all of this work, right? Well, there's a lot of confusion out there that remains about what exactly is it? Are we there yet? Are we doing it, right? I think agencies said, well, we renamed our service plans as recovery plans years ago, right? Aren't we doing it? I think we're doing it now. So Janice, do you want to talk a little bit more about what it really is and orient us to what we're going to offer here in the upcoming sessions?
Yep, I'm going to tag in here. So
okay.
In the absence of some of the actual practice guidelines that Amanda's talking about, one of the really big issues, of course, is that without those guidelines, there's very little accountability in the field, and it becomes really easy to default to the position that, we already do it. Like Amanda said, we sort of changed the name of our treatment plan to a recovery plan, when in reality, in the experience of people and families who are receiving services, things might feel a bit more like business as usual, if you will. So I'm going to start just by sharing a big picture framework and perspective that we have used over the years that we refer to as the 4 Ps model of PCRP. So if you start at the foundation of the pyramid, we need to carry the philosophy of recovery in our hearts, first and foremost. We have to believe that people can and do recover. They can and should have maximum control over decisions that impact their experience in care and their lives as a whole. And then that commitment to recovery philosophy should translate into a different way of partnering in the process of actually developing a plan, which should then in turn result in the co-creation of an actual PCRP planning document, right? Whether that's on paper or increasingly in an electronic health record. And in many cases, that plan's going to look very different from a traditional service plan. And finally, we need to keep in mind really the more aspirational purpose of PCRP in kind of going beyond more traditionally valued outcomes around symptom reduction and reducing hospitalizations to really encompassing kind of real impact, real change, and better lives for, people and families that we serve. So bear with me here. I'm trying to advance my slide. Did I lose slide control, Jen?
You still have it, but I will move it for you. How about that?
Sure, that
Here
would
we
be
go.
great.
Yep.
All right, so if we acknowledge that there can be a disconnect, between this vision of PCRP and the reality of what it looks like on the ground, what can we do about that? And, what kinds of skills and abilities do professionals need to have to really support high quality PCRP? So in order to really move from theory to practice and talk about the skills and abilities that practitioners need to have to facilitate PCRP, we want to introduce you to the work of an organization called NCAPS. So Jen, if you could go ahead and advance my slide. All right, so NCAPS stands for the National Center on Advancing Person-Centered Practices and Systems. NCAPS is a cross-disability initiative funded by CMS and the Administration for Community Living. I've had the pleasure of working with NCAPS over the past 5 years or so, specifically as it relates to the application of their mission in the behavioral health space. So this slide provides a graphic overview and an embedded link you see at the bottom of the page there to a really nice NCAPS resource we wanted to make sure that you're aware of around the 5 competency domains for practitioners who facilitate person-centered planning. So this resource was derived from a comprehensive scan of best practices from, I think, 20 different person-centered planning models available across the country, a whole series of key informant interviews with a particular emphasis throughout the process on soliciting lived experience input within the project team, within the interviews, and in a review of the documents we were creating by the NCAPS PAL group. That's their Person-Centered Advisory Leadership Group. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to briefly walk you through a high-level description of each domain and maybe offer you an example or two. And Amy's going to jump in and help me out with sharing some of her thoughts, especially as it relates to that 3rd domain you see there around rights, choice, and control. So Jen, can you go ahead and advance? Great. So starting at the top, this 1st domain really focuses on strategies to ensure that planning appreciates, the full humanity of the people and families that we serve. So rather than focusing more narrowly on the management of clinical symptoms, we're really looking at that building the good life in the community as the person defines it. And to do this well, staff really need to understand and respect the difference between things that we might think are important for an individual from a professional perspective versus what might be important to them from a personal perspective. Sometimes there's an alignment in those things, and sometimes there's tension, and it really takes skill in person-centered recovery planning to make sure that we are making space for both. This domain also challenges professionals to use a variety of tools to create comprehensive strengths-based profiles, and not only use those tools, but to capitalize on them as they then go together to co-create the actual plan of care. I mean, all too often I see practitioners who work really, really hard together in partnership with someone to help them discover or rediscover different gifts and strengths during the assessment process. And then ultimately those strengths really don't show up anywhere in the plan of care. And when that happens, we miss a really important opportunity. So this may be a topic that we dive into a little deeper in a future webinar. As we've had many folks ask the question around the fact that practitioners really often conceptually value the importance of strengths-based planning, but then they struggle to incorporate that thinking into the recovery plan itself. So stay tuned on that front. We'll probably be coming back to that one. This domain is also about using tools and strategies that demonstrate respect for a person's cultural worldview and preferences, as well as needs, including around individual or even collective trauma, which may arise from being a member of a historically marginalized group or identity status. And while this domain certainly does not require us, nor is it possible to be an expert on all cultures or life contexts, it does require us to be authentically curious as partners in this process, and curious on the front end and over time to really see beyond a person's diagnosis or disability to more fully appreciate their particular kind of unique vision of recovery. So next slide, John. So this next domain is the source of quite a bit of confusion. So I'm going to take a little bit more time unpacking it. So this one is really about cultivating connections that foster recovery, both inside the system and in the person's chosen broader community. So there are enhanced efforts to coordinate care across, a wide range of multidisciplinary professionals. That can include traditional as well as non-traditional professionals. And there's also an enhanced focus on making sure that a person's rights around community inclusion are understood and respected. Because recovery doesn't happen in a vacuum inside the boundaries of clinical treatment systems. People with lived experience tell us it needs to be nested in that broader community through meaningful connections to other human beings, meaningful participation in preferred activities, and valued social roles. So this domain really involves using tools such as community-based asset mapping or circles of support to really help people reconnect or perhaps connect for the first time with those different circles of support, including naturally occurring connections that they make, rather than just folks being surrounded by a sea of multidisciplinary professional providers. And very importantly, it involves being mindful of two cautionary ways in which this area of a practice, I think, sometimes goes awry. And over the years, I've come to refer to these things as clinical gatekeeping and the trap of the one-stop shop. So I'd like to say just a couple of words about those things. So by clinical gatekeeping, what that really means is that means recognizing that in traditional treatment systems and methods of planning, all too often we hold out things like getting a job I feel good about, or going back to school, or moving out on my own as kind of the reward at the end of the recovery journey, after a person has really, stabilized in their clinical status. And this type of clinical gatekeeping has a very direct impact on planning. And more importantly, it has a direct impact on people's lives. So despite the progress we've made, I continue to see plans, for example, that might repeatedly reference a person's desire to work, but yet the plan then states that the person's not going to be referred to supported employment until they've done 90 12-step meetings in 90 days, or they've had X number of, clean, toxicology screens, or people who, finally want to move out of the group home and get a place of their own, but they're told, we know this is important to you, but we really need to see 6 months of medication compliance before the team feels comfortable supporting that transition. So within person-centered recovery planning, we really need to be cognizant. We have to stop making people jump through clinical hoops and start with the understanding that all those things I just mentioned, they're not the reward at the end of the recovery journey. I always say that they're the reason the person takes the first step. So within this process, we have to be co-creating plans with people that start with the assumption and they honor a person's goals, and then they use the plan of care, a thoughtfully developed plan of care, to do that, while at the same time integrating those services and supports to give the person the best possible chance of success as they pursue that goal. Right? So in terms of the trap of the one-stop shop, what that really means is recognizing that in an effort to be holistic and support a person around the diverse dimensions of wellness, we sometimes slip into this pattern where we try to be all things for all people, right? And we end up recreating in sometimes artificial settings, things that, activities that really can and should be accessible to the person in the broader community. So if spirituality, for example, is a cornerstone of someone's recovery, before we add a new spirituality group at the treatment center to a person's recovery plan, can we first work together to try to co-create a plan that helps the person feel well enough to get back to Sunday services at their parish down on Main Street? Or it could be something like exercise. Before we add a yoga group over at the psychosocial rehabilitation program, can we try to negotiate free or reduced passes for people to do yoga at a local YMCA or a community center? So being mindful of this tension of the one-stop shop is a really critical aspect of this domain around cultivating connections, because when we continue to fall into this trap of the one-stop shop, we inadvertently send the message that people are not welcome in the broader community, right? And that just serves to further intensify and perpetuate not only internalized stigma, within people that we're supporting, but equally important, it allows the broader community to continue to discriminate against those we serve. So again, just trying to be mindful of some of these cautionary notes, because even in some of, I would say, the most committed and recovery-oriented systems I've worked with, this can something that can quickly go awry. All right, next domain. Jen, if you could advance. All right, so while all of the domains of competency need to work together in synergy, the domain of rights, choice, and control is perhaps the most essential within this set. Earlier this morning, when I was looking at my notes to get ready for today, I was reminded of a quote that actually starts page 1 of an early version of our Connecticut recovery practice guidelines. And that quote came out of the Supreme Court. And it says, "No right is held more sacred than the right of every individual to the possession and control of their own person, free from all restraint or interference from others, unless by clear and unquestioned authority of law." And being mindful of this right is really what this third domain is all about: rights, choice, and control. Whether that is in honoring a person or a family's chosen recovery goals for their plan, or it could mean supporting them to learn more about completing a person-centered advanced crisis planning document, such as a psychiatric advanced directive, or making use of the advanced crisis planning component of wellness recovery action plan. And since this domain is so essential in the overall implementation of person-centered recovery planning, I'm going to pause there. And I'm actually going to invite Amy to talk a little bit about this one from the perspective of lived experience.
It doesn't matter how many times I do webinars, I always start talking when it's on mute. It's one of those things. It's just one of those things. When I think about like my journey in my life and the impact that just this page, just this screen has had on my journey, it's pretty incredible. And part of that goes into the place of, for many years, I was told all the things I would never do, never accomplish. And I was told this, and there was no place of choice. And it came from the place that, there was a belief that because of what I was navigating, the diagnoses, that I was not able to make those choices. And I believe that belief. And I think what I've found, especially working in the realm of peer support, is so often people have lost that voice, don't know how to find that voice, or have never had that voice. And when we support individuals in like finding that voice, even if it's messy at first, like mountains move. When they were starting to look at discharge for me, I was in the state hospital and I was actually hospitalized for almost a year. This was a number of years ago. And when they started talking about discharge, they had a community liaison there that was there with my team. And the first thing that this woman that she was trying to do was put me back in a board and care home. And like everything in me just like panicked and froze. And then I had team members who were at that table who I believed and were supportive and who were supportive in my journey, had been part of it. That like I had started to find my voice, and this was a place where I was able to actually put it into practice. And I think it was something that moved the rest of my life forward. I was able to actually say that if I go there, if I go to a board and care home, I'm not going to survive. And that's how like my experiences, like the belief of like what life could be, the conversations I had, like I didn't see how I could survive going back into that environment. And so I had a team who was surrounding me who just started exploring, okay, well, like what does that look like? I went on disability when I was 18, and so I got a whole $500 and something a month, right? So there wasn't a lot of money to pay for something other than a board and care home. But they took the time and they took the space and we started exploring, and they kind of like had the community liaison just kind of wait a little bit to let us kind of see what was available. And I actually found a efficiency apartment that I was able to move into that was like $200 at that time, which this was years ago, just so you know. And I moved into that efficiency apartment. And I remember when I left that gate, I had been hospitalized between 40 and 50 times up to that point. And when I left that gate into that apartment, I haven't been hospitalized since. And there's a realm of things that happen within that. And part of that was me starting to find my voice, me starting to figure out like what did life look like, me starting to enact that place of choice, but also saying the conversation of no to providers, which wasn't easy. It also came around the place where I started learning what my rights were, in the sense that I had so often just gone with whatever had happened, no matter what that was. And I started learning that there were certain things that had happened that it wasn't okay that they occurred. And in learning that, it's like I started taking this sense of who I was, that I was a human being, whereas for many years, I just viewed myself as someone who was really, really sick. You know, I heard things and saw things that others didn't. You know, people would view me from these different perspectives. But slowly, I started seeing myself differently. And that was because I had spaces that allowed me to do that exploration. I will tell you a funny story too, though. It's kind of not funny. It's kind of one of those things that, but it's kind of funny. I think it's kind of a little funny to this day. After I was out of the hospital I'd been out of the hospital probably at that point in time, almost like a year or 2 years, which was like unheard of. And I started thinking about like going back to work. Like I wanted to work. I wanted to have some kind of a purpose. I was going to college, like, so I had something to get out every day. But I saw there was like this application for the state hospital for a part-time position. And I was like, I can do that. Like I know I can tell people where to go on that campus because I knew every part of that campus. And I remember going to my ACT team because I was in ACT team services at the time, and basically said, I want to apply for this job. I think I can do this, right? I think I can like do this role. And, you know, at the time they were worried that I was getting unwell again and were really concerned about me making those choices and taking those chances. And it was the place where I probably would have done things a little different to this day. But I applied for it and I didn't tell them. I got the job. And, you know, it was through that part-time job that I found this beauty of my lived experience, where I started the first peer support program in the state hospital system, which has led me to like being here with you today. Being able to take that chance and feeling that I had that ability to do that and support it, even though my team wasn't supportive, but like having built that up within. Now, I say that because there was a place where a year later, I ran into the same, my caseworker who was on that ACT team, and she basically apologized to me. She had heard that I was working there, and she's like, I will never do that again. I will never take or have a belief that what someone's wanting to do is not something that could be possible. And we shared and she talked about the lesson that was learned. And, you know, that's one of the reasons, like I said, I love the work of peer support because it really is supporting the individual's self-determination. And I love the tools that can come out of this conversation around creating also those advanced directives or, you know, the psychiatric advanced directives. Or for me, I created a crisis plan with RAP. And in doing that, it was like I started getting a firmer foundation under me, thinking that maybe should something happen, that my voice will be heard in a place that it was never heard before. Now, with that plan in place, I went through a period where I actually got toxic on medications. I got really, really unwell. And because I had this plan in place, it actually got enacted. I was out of work for about a week. I didn't end up being hospitalized. And like I had this sense of accomplishing something that I was totally afraid of. If that makes no sense how I was saying that. I'm gonna just stop myself there for a second. I lived in fear of going into the hole. And I always called it the hole, that place of the abyss. And going through that experience, having that plan in place, coming out on the other side, like from there on out, I knew that that was not something I needed to fear. So with that, I know that I've taken a little bit of the time, but this section is just, all of these sections are so important, but this one really speaks to me in a lot of ways. So thanks, Janice.
It's such powerful stuff. And please, Amy, be sure to be checking the chat because your words and heart have been very impactful to folks today. And y'all will likely be hearing some more from Amy in this 6-month series. So feel free to come on back and check it out in the future. Amy sharing, you know, not just from your lived experience, but you reference also in there also the really potentially powerful role of peer supporters in supporting individuals around many ways, but this domain in particular, in terms of really discovering and rediscovering and reclaiming their voice and choice and care. So many thanks to you, Amy. Jen, can you advance to the next slide? All right, so 2 more domains to cover before I kick it on back over to Amanda. So this 4th domain title, partnership, teamwork, facilitation, and coordination. It's a mouthful, but it essentially boils down to the quality of the planning process or the meeting or meetings, you know, plural, that precedes the development of the written plan. It speaks both to the logistics of how that planning, meeting, or conversation is organized, as well as to the roles that people take on during the conversation itself. So I should say that we recognize that much planning is historically done in the context of one-to-one meetings, especially in the behavioral health space. And some of the competencies within this domain speak more to the skill needed to effectively facilitate these group team-based meetings where multiple professionals and natural supporters might be involved and gathered together. But the fundamental premise of quality within this domain remains the same. And that's just to make sure that we're respecting the preference of the person or the family in organizing the meeting and determining who's involved. So for example, this domain talks about the importance at the discretion of the individual of involving natural supporters such as friends, family, fellow parishioners, different community contacts. It could be coworkers. I always tell the story. I even had a mailman who was involved in the development of a person-centered plan years ago, who in the course of, delivering mail, just developed this, friendship with an individual. And that person, the biggest part of their recovery plan was around employment and getting back to work. And they were struggling to get going and be on time for that. And instead of just dropping the mail in the mailbox, that mailman was actually just knocking on the door, making sure to say a quick hello. And, it sounds like a very simple thing, but was really just a powerful, natural support. One simple action like that really made a difference in the successful execution of that plan. So also, I would say that I think it's important to recognize that it's not always feasible, and sometimes honestly not even desired, for all these folks to convene in an actual group-based planning meeting. And if that's the case, we try to get creative and solicit input and support in a variety of ways, whether that's through arranging a quick phone call, Zooming someone in, or whatever strategies that we might use. And then lastly, I would say that this domain is about making space for all voices and being really careful, especially in the context of team-based meetings, not to default to talking about a person as if they are not in the room. So by that, what I mean is, even today, it's better than it was years ago, but even today, if I'm sitting in on a planning meeting and there's a team of people, they're supporting an individual in their recovery, I have seen these group dynamics where, let's say, for example, a person is not attending recommended groups or activities at the psychosocial rehab center. And I've seen facilitators of those meetings, turn to the group leader and say, hey, I've recognized from the notes that, Janice hasn't been, attending the regularly scheduled psychosocial rehab group. What's going on? But meanwhile, Janice is sitting right over here next to the facilitator. So someone in that room, if not the facilitator, needs to be brave enough to step into that space and redirect the conversation back to Janice, to the focus person, and say, hey, listen, you used to seem to really love these groups and find them helpful. We couldn't help but notice that we've missed you lately. What's going on? Are they not working for you? Is there a barrier to getting there? Let's talk about it and let's brainstorm. All right, Jen, go ahead and get me to my next domain here. All right, so fifth and final domain. So one thing that you're probably going to notice in the remarks so far today across these first 4 competency domains, we have yet to really dive deep into the written plan itself and how it comes together. So thus far, what we've really been focusing on is the essential shifts in process and relationships. And the focus and balance across these 5 core competencies in recovery planning, it really is intentional, because very often when systems of care launch efforts to implement PCRP, there's a tendency to prematurely jump to kind of the nuts and bolts of the planning documentation, because it's honestly such a source of frustration in the field. And we can talk more about that in a minute. But, I often get the message when I enter into different systems of care, can you just teach my staff how to write the plan? And yes, we've developed tools and strategies to support that, but again, we can't overlook the critical nature of the processes and relationships that have to be underneath that plan and the quality of that plan. So that's my caveat. But having said that, I'm personally also a big believer that the quality of the planning document itself, it matters. It matters because the plan is a tool of accountability, and because it should be a manifestation of the person-centered partnership in staying kind of true to that recovery vision that a person or a family articulates. And unfortunately, if you think back earlier to that, the 4 Ps pyramid model of person-centered recovery planning that I shared, it's in moving from taking the leap from person-centered process to person-centered documentation that the quality often really breaks down. And in my experience, there are lots of practitioners out there who they carry person-centered philosophy in their hearts. They work hard to use person-centered strategies in their partnerships, but they really, really struggle to translate that into the formal documentation of the service plan. So this is an area where we've had a lot of struggle, and that's for a variety of reasons. One of them being that very few people get kind of good, solid, core foundational training in their educational programs around what makes a good plan of care, right? And then also because there's been a lot of mixed messages and confusion in the field around the treatment plan documentation, and specifically how a person can write one that, first and foremost, honors the person and the family. But at the same time, it has to satisfy the chart and really a myriad of kind of complex fiscal and regulatory requirements. So we've worked hard over the last several years to develop a variety of kind of tools and indicators around this domain to really clarify what a good PCRP might look like. Specifically, the kinds of things we'd be looking for is, making sure that plans are using person or identity first language, that long-term recovery goals reflect the person's vision of a good life in their chosen community. Again, sort of beyond just the narrow management of clinical symptoms or reducing hospitalizations. Those things can and often are a critical part of recovery. But remember, we're going for a more aspirational purpose and outcome here in the person-centered recovery planning model. We'd also be looking to craft short-term objectives that are about meaningful and measurable interim changes that actually matter to a person, right? And they go beyond just the act of attending services. And, finally, building in strategies, that really draw upon a person's strengths and interests, as we talked about earlier. So that just gives you a little bit of a sense of what we might be looking for in the plan itself. At the end, we'll share a link to some quality indicators tools that we've developed to support this domain. But one more word on this before I am going to get ready to pass it over to Amanda is that, you have your co-created, hopefully high quality person-centered recovery plan, but what they say even about the best laid plans. Even the best laid plans, they need to evolve to really reflect a person's changing preferences and their progress along the way. And equally critical is the fact that, as people, we pay attention to what gets measured, and that measurement in the form of ongoing quality monitoring of both planning processes and documentation is really essential to support implementation. So again, this is an area where we've collected and curated a range of tools and strategies that we're hoping to share with you over the next 6 months in the consultation corner. So Jen, next slide. For now, I'm just going to leave you with a take-home message, not just about the vision of what a good plan or a better plan might look like, but also a reminder about the kinds of cookie-cutter, deficit-focused, compliance-driven plans that we are really trying to move away from in PCRP. And while I've focused largely on the micro level of person-centered recovery planning in terms of service delivery, I'm going to turn it back over to Amanda because she's going to talk about another really critical piece of the puzzle in terms of systems alignment in support of PCRP implementation. So next slide and over on.
Yes. Thank you. So you all have heard a lot of really critical perspectives of what it takes to do really, really good person-centered recovery planning through those different competency domains. And a lot of that information had to do with what happens between supporters and the individual being supported, right? And so it's really easy to fall into this trap of let's focus on the person that's doing the planning. Let's train them up really, really good so that they know how to lead that planning process. Let's put all of our resources into training these plan writers, to training these planning facilitators. But I think most of you probably realize that it's not that simple, that there's this whole system in place that is critical to staff people who are facilitating the planning process, who are writing the plan documents, who are working within the system. And if we don't have a systems approach, we're not going to be successful in implementing a person-centered process. So I want to introduce this tool, but I want to say a little bit more about what we've seen in the field of how to be successful in accomplishing lasting change at any organization who wishes to truly adopt a person-centered approach to care and to planning. So Janice mentioned NCAPS. They have lots of excellent tools that are really easy to access. They're all free and quick to download. I think Lee is ready to drop in a link in the chat here for this one. So this is a great self-assessment if you want to look at a particular system and how it's functioning in regard to person-centered planning. And you can see the 8 domains that the assessment prompts for assessment. And multiple people can take the assessment. You see here it looks at leadership, culture, eligibility and service, even finance, different things like that. So let me just say a little bit more. We get a lot of requests to do training. Please come, like Janice was saying, please come train my staff, right? On how to do this, how to interview people better, how to write plans better. And training, staff training is a critical part of implementation. But not only is it not enough, it can actually do some damage if you put all of your resources into asking staff to change and take on this new approach without changing the environment that they're working within, because they will quickly identify lots of barriers. And if there aren't people that are working to remove those barriers, and I'll name some of what those barriers are, it falls flat, right? It's like this organization isn't serious about what it's asking me to do. And if the employees buy into it and they see this really is important, then it can actually have a detrimental effect, right? You can end up losing some staff, because it's like, well, wait, I really believe in this. I want to work at an organization that really, is serious about recovery-oriented care or whatever. So it's really important. There are some very small, simple things that leadership, that the QM department, that they can do to support the effort and to be ready to remove barriers. Everything like, supervisors being ready to be in alignment and reinforce the training, performance reviews, hiring practices, policies and procedures, of course, You know, overhauling your electronic health record is not anybody's favorite project. We understand that, but there are some small things that you can do, or even addressing, you know, we know that this isn't in alignment, but, you know, put this information in this free text field. Just small little things like that, you know, helping people understand how to use your existing, you know, record to accomplish, you know, a person-centered plan goes a long way. The quality monitoring that Janice just mentioned in that domain, you know, this program, one of the things that we're offering is potentially, you know, helping you with creating a QM review tool that will incorporate some person-centered standards. Critical messaging by leadership to reinforce how the person-centered standards actually links to your agency's mission as an organization. And then, of course, you know, being ready to remove some of those implementation barriers, and even involvement by your board or advisory councils, looking at how services are financed in certain situations. So there's a lot to look at from a much broader scale. And it doesn't have to be overwhelming. And there are just some really simple things to do to reinforce the efforts in addition to training. So just wanted to mention that. And this program can help with some of the broader scale things. On another note that I think is really important, as we talk about adding on, oh, it's really important to do this, and it's really important to do that. It's also really important to look at what are some of these old practices that are getting in the way that need to be cleared out. And I'm going to turn it over to Amy to lead us in a little exercise that looks at just that, at clearing out some of the old that's getting in our way. Amy, you want to tell them what we have in mind here?
I sure do. And I took myself off mute this time.
There we go.
So, you know, it's kind of like what Amanda was saying, you know, sometimes despite our best efforts, despite all the things that we've been doing, and the progress that's been made to create those person-centered practices, maybe at your organization, from both that micro and the macro levels, you know that there's work to do. You know that there are things that are still occurring that are really getting in the way. And when I started thinking about change and making recovery-oriented change or change processes, one of the things that really speaks to me is looking at, like, what are the things I'm trying to get away from? What are the things that are getting in the way? What are those specific actions, right, that are in place or that may be in place that are keeping me from what I may envision, right? So we're going to do a fun little thing. And so there is a QR code here. And then in the chat box, they just dropped a link. And we're about to open a screen. It's called something that I forgot the name of. But basically what we're going to do is we're going to do a Wordle. And with that, I'm going to ask Amanda to open it. And a Mentimeter, thank you, Janice. I knew it was something. But what we're going to look at, we're going to ask you to do once you hit that QR code and the link and you go there, is you're going to have the opportunity to put in words, short phrases about those things that can undermine the person-centered recovery process, right? What are those actions that are either currently taking place or that you might think could get
Judgment or judgmentalism?
Judgmentalism.
Well, we're going to open up the thing and we want you to type it in. We're going to open the Mentimeter. Are y'all able to see it or get to it?
So Jen, if you want to stop sharing the slides, I'll share the Mentimeter Is everybody seeing the link in the chat where you can type in for the word cloud?
There it is.
There we go. And
Great.
so once it pops up and you go to the link, you're going to see there's going to be like a box. And so just type those words in and hit enter. Oh, we got tons of them already there. Oh, yeah. Dictator approach, toxic judgmentalism, medical model. So many things that get in our way of doing or obtaining that vision. So now, give you just maybe a minute more to do this because y'all are putting tons of stuff in here. And I know for me, the more I can identify the things that get in the way or the things that are in place of doing what it is that I want to shift, then I can do something about it. So now I'm going to ask you to shift some things just a little bit. So we know that these actions that get put in place, these actions that are happening can undermine or threaten the person-centered planning process. What is the impact of that? So I'm going to ask you to start typing in that emotional impact, the impact that happens when these practices are actually in place. Yeah.
And the words that you see biggest in the center are the ones that are being agreed upon. So if those getting bigger and bigger, those are the pieces that we're seeing amongst the whole crowd of folks in this room. So thank you.
Thanks for sharing that. And I think it's really important to note that that impacts not just with the person served, but it's also with, as we're seeing show up on here, the workers at the organization. And that trickles out. It gets in our way. We lose great employees.
We sometimes lose lives, as Wanda
Exactly.
is pointing out in the chat.
Yeah. Yeah. And we'll keep going for a little bit. This is going to be up for a little bit, but the one thing I know, and I really appreciate your participation in this, and like this word cloud is so powerful. And powerful in the space, in the way of like that reason why. Right? Like these are the reasons why we're here. These are the reasons why you're here on this screen today or looking at this learning collaborative. To shift these experiences, to shift persons experiencing the impact of those experiences. And so with that, I'm going to turn it back over to someone. I think it's actually to Amanda. No,
Me first, then
it's
Amanda.
Janice first. I'm going to turn it over to Janice first and kind of talk about like what this conversation can look like.
Great. Thank you, Amy. And thank you everyone for your participation. So we have a sense of what it is we're trying to move away from and have a bit of a sense of what we're trying to move toward. So how can the consultation corner over the next 6 months help you or your organization to do that? So first, I would say that we are really trying to offer a little bit of something for everyone. We recognize that on PCRP, Amanda referenced this, it has to be supported by multi-level interventions and also the engagement of diverse stakeholder groups. So to that end, we are anticipating offering activities and webinars designed to target organization and systems leaders, direct support practitioners, as well as peer supporters and peer specialists. And then in terms of how we actually plan to do that in the design of the consultation center. So we are going to be offering a monthly topic focused webinar. So that topic focused webinar is open to a national audience. Okay. Then in keeping with the topic of that monthly webinar, we're going to also be offering a follow-up kind of hands-on technical assistance session that kind of matches that month's topic. And in order to make sure that that TA session is really as productive and as practical as possible, we have to keep that to a much smaller group than we have here today. And because this is a initiative that's co-sponsored across regions 1 through 6, if you're unsure which state your region is attached to, you can see it on the screen there. The spaces in our technical assistance session are first going to be prioritized for webinar participants who are from those regions. And it is a prerequisite to participate in TA to have participated on the webinar, because the webinar is where we kind of get on the same page about the topic. We share some tools and resources, and then the TA session is when we're going to kind of dig a little bit deeper. And then for both the TA sessions and the webinar series, we anticipate involving a number of subject matter experts with both professional and lived experience around different PCRP hot topics, if you will, that you're going to get a chance to weigh in on yourselves today in just a minute. So you might be seeing me and Amanda and Amy again, along with some of our friends and colleagues from around the country who are, doing some really nice work in this space. So now I am going to turn it over to Amanda and just ask Amanda to just say a couple of words about what a TA session might look like before we do the poll. Thanks, Jen.
Yeah, real quickly, we plan to design, like Jana said, the TA sessions to really be very responsive to what you want to work on most, like a work session, right? So like I said earlier, it might be bring your QM review tool and get feedback on it, and we'll make progress on those together. Or it might be something, Amy and I have had a lot of success with people have asked, how do I make progress in supporting an individual who, their PCRP is due and I need to do goal discovery with them, but they're seeing and hearing things that other people don't experience, and I'm having trouble communicating with them. How do I make progress on creating a plan, right? And so we've done all sorts of things where it's like, ask the expert, meaning come and ask Amy because she has lived experience in this area, and she's been generous enough to share some of her experience and what was helpful and what was not helpful to her with supporters during that time, and just kind of brainstorm different communication techniques and being there with people when they felt overwhelmed. And then how do you bring that to like a document when the document is due, right? Like how do you kind of reconcile the system telling you to do one thing, but then your ethics and your good judgment is telling you to just sit with someone and support them in a time of need, right? So it might be direct practice related, it might be more on an agency level or leadership or systems level, but definitely more consultative, helping you accomplish real things that, you know, project related kind of things. So hopefully that gives you some sense
That's
of
great.
what we have
Thanks,
in mind.
Amanda.
Yeah.
All right, next slide. So Christine's going to open a poll here in a second. Now that you have just a sense of the overall design of the consultation corner, we really want to sort of practice what we preach and get some input from all of you about what some of the priority topics are that you'd like to see addressed over the next 6 months. So we've created a poll here with some options just to get us going based on kind of the frequently asked questions that pop up in the field, but it's by no means exhaustive. So you'll see now that you have an opportunity to tell us about a need or an interest that you have that is maybe not on the menu. So if you'd please go ahead and weigh in on this for us, that would be great. And you can choose up to 3 with this one. It's set up to be multiple choice. Okay, great. I'm going to prompt Christine if you can go ahead and close that poll for us and share the results. You're going to have an ongoing opportunity to give us some feedback on this in a minute, but at least briefly here, you see we've got a wide diversity, pretty much every topic being of interest, with lots of interest around the person-centered advanced crisis planning, the struggles in that co-creation of a really good quality plan, what that looks like. So what I will say is that given the number of months that we have in the initiative, we're not going to be able to dedicate a webinar to each of these topics, but we're going to go back as a project team and kind of get creative about how we might combine topics or integrate your interests across each of the offerings over the next 6 months. And we also, if you could go to the next slide, would love it if you would help us spread the word, and we'd like to hear from others in your world or at your organization who might be in a position also to share with us some of the questions or needs that are out there in the field on this topic. So what we design can be as responsive as possible to your priorities. So you will see that there is a link in the chat box as well as a QR code on the screen. And if you can help us gather that additional feedback, we would much appreciate that. Just a note on the timing that we're going to keep this poll open until close of business on Monday, April 5th, just to allow us some time to consolidate the input and then kind of get to work on designing the balance of the consultation corner and mapping our topics out across the months, securing additional subject matter experts if needed, etc. So Jen, I'm actually going to skip the video just in the interest of time. I think we're running a little bit short. If you could advance the slides for me. Throughout the presentation, I have referenced, Amanda has referenced, Amy has referenced a variety of different tools and resources, and there was a lot of hot chatter in the chat box about people wanting to access them. There are live links within the slides themselves, but also we've consolidated some of our favorite kind of most comprehensive resources here for you into a bit of a care package of PCRP resources. Some of these our project team has been directly involved in creating. Others are just things that we've curated from the really nice stuff we've seen out there in the field from colleagues around the country. And then last but not least, if we could go to the next slide. We invite you all to provide your feedback on today's session. It really does matter to us, especially in a kind of continuous series like this that's going to be unfolding over several months. We really do want to get your ideas about what worked well, what we might want to switch up. So if you could complete the brief evaluation survey, you see a link in the chat, you see a QR code on the screen. You'll also be getting email follow-up that includes the link. We again really kind of want to hear your thoughts so that we can think about what we might do a little bit differently next time. And then very last slide, a reminder that while this initiative is co-sponsored by Regions 1 and 6, we are part of a larger national network of regional mental health technology transfer centers, and just want to invite you to get a little bit more familiar, not just with the work of Regions 1 and 6, but the work and products and resources that are available from our colleagues in the other centers around the country. So I'm going to pause there. We have about 3 minutes left, and I'm not sure, Amanda or Amy or anyone on our project team, is there anything in particular in the chat box? Some of us tried to respond to questions in the chat as we went, but anything stand out that we'd want to take a minute to reflect on before we close?
Janice, we do have a few questions in the Q&A. I'm not sure if any of you have the answers for those.
Okay, so Lilibeth is asking about the extent to which resources for Spanish-speaking audiences are available. Not enough is what I will say. There are some from within the live links and tools that are accessible to Spanish-speaking audiences, but I would say I'm only familiar with about a handful of them, but feel free actually even to email me, Lilibeth, and we'll make it a point to make sure we point in the direction of those specific links.
New Jersey, what's their access, Janice?
Access in terms of region?
Mm-hmm.
And okay, so New Jersey is not in regions 1 or 6. I believe you're in region 2. So for those of you that we got excited today and you're not in regions 1 or 6, just because of the co-sponsorship, we have to start by offering the TA session availability to our constituents. But just know that if we do have a lot of demand, or if for some reason that session doesn't enroll fully, we will be kind of opening up that TA session to a broader audience that might include some folks from New Jersey and other places around the country, or maybe we'll take a look at our capacity and maybe we'll even add an additional TA session or 2 to the calendar. Well, I'm just gonna close just by
Can
offering
someone get the Q&A question, please?
Alicia, that's a super rich, great consultative question. I don't know that we would be able to do it justice in the 1 minute that we have. It's a really great question for like supervision, or, you know, like
we're gonna save the chat. And how about, since we didn't get to it and you took the time to put it in the Q&A, we can send you an email with just some initial thoughts.
yeah.
But
It's
for
such
now,
a great question, but
it's very rich.
I feel like I wouldn't be able to begin to scratch the surface, Alicia.
Yeah. We'll be in touch.
I'm
Be in
sorry.
touch.
Yes.
So a big thank you to everyone who joined us today, but also I really personally want to thank Amanda and Amy and our entire project team. A cross-regional effort like this has a lot of complex moving parts behind the scenes, and it's been a pleasure to do this with you. So many thanks to those who participated, and many thanks to everyone on our Teams. So stay tuned by email. You're going to be getting a lot of other resources. Amanda or Amy, any quick closing words?
No, I hope to meet some of you and have more time to dive into some of these rich topics with you.
I just thank you for taking the time to be here and the work that you're doing, and really looking at how to improve this PCRP process at your organization and person-centered processes. Because for me, as somebody who's navigated the system, and for many others, I think it's the thing that can make such a difference in one's life. And, it starts with each of us in different ways. So thanks for being here.
Great note to close on. Thank you, Amy. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon, everyone, and hope to see some of you in the coming months.